Welcome to another IB Environmental Systems and Societies video. Today's topic is 5.3 Soil Degradation and Conservation. By the end of this video, you should understand how soils develop, how human activities impact soil health, and what we can do to preserve this vital resource. Let's get into it. Let's begin with our first significant idea. Fertile soils require significant time to develop through the process of succession, which we studied back in topic 2. As you can see in this illustration, soils get deeper and become more biologically complex over time. They start as a really shallow layer of windblown dust and lightly weathered rock. As subsequent generations of mosses, lichens, and plants grow and deposit more biomass, they gradually add organic matter to the soil matrix, and that improves soil fertility. Looking at this detailed diagram of soil development, we can observe how soil horizons form over time. Starting with bare rock, pioneer species like lichens begin the weathering process. Small annual plants then follow, then perennial shrubs and grasses, eventually leading to more complex plant communities. With each stage, the soil becomes richer and deeper. Our second significant idea states that human activities may reduce soil fertility and increase soil erosion. When we examine erosion in this landscape, we can see how soil degradation often results from changes in land use patterns and management practices. Here's a stark example of soil erosion caused by high salinity in the water table from Australia's capital territory. This shows how human activities can trigger a cascade of soil degradation processes. The third significant idea in this topic introduces us to soil conservation strategies. These exist and can be used to preserve soil fertility and reduce soil erosion. We're going to examine several of them in detail. The first key concept we need to understand is how soil ecosystems change through succession. Back in content statement 5.3.1, we learned that fertile soil contains a community of organisms that all work together to maintain functioning nutrient cycles. These organisms are also what helps make the soil resistant to erosion. Moving on to our understanding of human impacts, we see how intensive grazing can significantly affect soil health. When you take a look at this image, consider 3 critical factors. First, what the animals eat. Second, how many animals are present. And third, the impact of soil compaction from all of their hooves stamping around on the ground for so long. Urbanization presents another major challenge to soil conservation. Check out this aerial view of Barcelona in Spain. Where do you think things grow in this picture? This question becomes increasingly important as cities expand onto formerly productive agricultural land. As those cities get bigger and bigger, the amount of green space dedicated becomes smaller and smaller. Here we can see the effects of over-irrigation in Western Australia. This shows how improper irrigation practices can lead to soil salinization. And that's just one of the serious consequences of reduced soil fertility. When you look at this monoculture soybean field in North America, we need to consider several different factors. The food supply for pests, the impacts on biodiversity and food webs, the increased need for herbicides and pesticides to keep those populations under control, and the importance of crop rotation. When we compare different agricultural approaches, you're going to find that commercial, industrialized food production systems generally tend to reduce soil fertility more than small-scale subsistence farming methods. It's not universally true, that's a generalization, but broadly speaking, commercial food production systems will reduce soil fertility more than your small-scale subsistence farmers do. This key understanding helps us evaluate different approaches to soil management, and that's something you might see on your ESS exams. Speaking of sustainable practices, let's take a look at this example of small-scale farming in Kenya. Notice how bean and banana intercropping demonstrates key principles of soil conservation, particularly diverse crop selection and natural nutrient cycling. The beans and the bananas have different nutrient requirements, and therefore they place different demands on the soil. This detailed landscape shows us how soil erosion develops over time. Highland forests in the background naturally intercept and slow rainfall, and their roots absorb water and they hold the soils in place. Then the leaf litter adds organic matter to the soils, and that improves nutrient levels and fertility. So this system provides a model for sustainable soil management. When forests are replaced with agricultural fields, that disrupts this natural balance that we saw in the previous image. The nutrient cycle is interrupted and roots no longer hold soil in place. That represents a critical turning point or a tipping point in soil degradation. Because the roots aren't holding the soil in place, you get increases in rates of erosion and you start to see nutrient levels falling away. The consequences become even more apparent as thin layers of soil nutrients are rapidly lost during agricultural harvesting. Right? That top layer of soil is where we grow all of our agricultural crops. When crops are removed from the land without proper nutrient replacement, you're going to see a dramatic decline in soil fertility over just a few growing seasons. That's part of what pushes and drives and perpetuates slash and burn style agriculture. Without nutrients, neither trees nor crops can grow effectively. Gullies start to form because there are no more roots to absorb the water or hold the soil in place. And all that runoff carries more and more topsoil downhill. When that topsoil goes away, it carries the nutrients away with it, and that creates a destructive, positive feedback loop. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that soil degradation and soil loss forces farmers to cut more forest and plant on more and more extreme slopes in search of fertile land to grow crops, and that perpetuates the soil loss cycle. This connects directly to our understanding of human impacts discussed in Content Statement 5.3 and going all the way back to those feedback loops that we discussed in Topic 1. Take a look at this detailed cross-section of the landscape. You can see how different human activities contribute to soil toxification, from forest fires and volcanic activities in the atmosphere to industrial effluents and agricultural chemicals at ground level, potentially toxic elements entering the soil through multiple pathways. That's a lot of human impacts on our soil system. If we understand all those processes, we can develop more effective soil protection strategies. Let's take a look at the process of salinization a little more closely. When we use flood or ditch irrigation with mineral-rich water, evapotranspiration leaves these minerals behind. As the water evaporates off the surface of the soil, the water goes away and all those minerals that were in the water are left behind. That's what we call salt. Over time, the salts build up and they eventually reach levels that exceed what plants can tolerate, and that makes the soil increasingly hostile to plant growth. This represents one of the 4 major consequences of reduced soil fertility that we discussed earlier. So far, we've looked at a lot of problems. Now let's take a look at solutions. So we're going to talk about soil conservation measures. Soil conditioners, particularly organic materials like compost, play a really important role in maintaining soil health. This image from Haiti shows the dramatic difference that adding organic matter can make to soil productivity. On the left, you can see healthy sorghum that's growing in composted soil. But on the right-hand side, all the plants are stunted because that soil hasn't been treated and it doesn't have nearly as many nutrients, and it doesn't have the compost's ability to hold on to more water and make it available for the plants. Soil conditioners improve soil quality in several different ways. They enhance nutrient content, they increase the soil surface area, and they improve water retention. The deep black color of well-composted soil indicates high levels of organic matter and nutrients that are available to plants. Think of compost as mimicking nature's own nutrient cycling process. It's like a human way to create the humus that is there in the top layers of soils, particularly in forests. We can compare different scales of composting operations. While commercial composting facilities process large volumes of organic matter mechanically, subsistence farmers often create smaller, manually maintained compost piles. Both approaches contribute to soil health, but their scale and their methods differ pretty significantly. Let's take a look at wind reduction techniques. This diagram shows how strategically placed windbreaks protect crops and soils. Notice how the protected zone is 8 or 10 times wider than the height of the trees planted as the windbreak. This kind of a system not only prevents soil erosion, but it can also reduce soil evaporation, and it can create beneficial microclimates for crops. Another significant benefit of windbreaks is how they create multiple positive effects in agricultural systems. Beyond reducing wind erosion, they help manage drifting snow, they protect livestock, they provide wildlife habitat, And with the right crops, they even enhance pollination by creating shelter for beneficial insects like bees. This kind of an integrated approach to soil conservation demonstrates how natural solutions can help serve multiple purposes. This is when human interventions mimic natural systems. We're looking at how all those different parts fit together. Cultivation techniques represent another important soil conservation strategy. Here, you can see how terracing transforms really steep hillsides into productive agricultural land. Before they were terraced, these hills would have been subject to really intense soil erosion, as we saw in earlier slides. But by creating level platforms for farming, the terraces really dramatically slow the movement of both wind and water across the soil surface. And that prevents erosion while making agriculture a lot easier on otherwise really challenging terrain. It does require a tremendous input of labor to install in the first place, but when terraces are done right, they will last many years or even many human generations. And so over the long term, they pay off. Contour plowing is another soil conservation technique, and it's kind of like terracing, just on a much smaller scale. It's like little mini terraces in the field. By following the natural contours of the land, where essentially you're plowing across hills instead of up and down them, farmers create what we might think of as those little mini terraces between the crop rows. These subtle ridges significantly slow the horizontal movement of water across fields, and that reduces erosion, and it also helps retain both soil and moisture where the crops need it most. Crop rotation represents one of our most powerful soil conservation tools, and it's been used by many cultures for many, many generations. This systematic approach addresses multiple aspects of soil health at the same time. Different crops have different nutrient demands, so when we rotate through a sequence of crops, that helps maintain soil fertility, because different crops take different nutrients out of the soil, and different crops also add different nutrients back into the soil while they're growing, especially when we include nitrogen-fixing legumes like beans or clover that naturally replenish nutrients that have been depleted by heavy feeders like corn. Additionally, rotation disrupts pest cycles, and it helps improve nutrition for subsistence farmers. When we disrupt those pest cycles, it also reduces the need for farmers to buy and apply pesticides. So it becomes more sustainable from a biodiversity perspective, and it also becomes more economically sustainable, particularly for your subsistence farmers. Companion planting, or intercropping, takes this concept further. By growing multiple crop species together, we can optimize nutrient use, we can minimize pest problems, enhance biodiversity, and improve the overall system resilience. Notice how different plants occupy different vertical spaces and root zones, and that makes much more efficient use of all the available resources on that site. This world map illustrates how soil degradation varies across regions, with notable differences between temperate and tropical zones, as well as between more and less economically developed countries, your MEDCs and your LEDCs. If you can understand these kinds of patterns, that helps you write about more effective, locally appropriate conservation strategies on your exams. As we consider soil degradation and conservation, we have to recognize both how our understanding has changed and how different cultural perspectives influence soil management practices. This connects back to broader questions about how we measure progress in environmental science and how timescales affect our perception of change. Let's review a few key relationships that we've explored. First, the connection between soil ecosystem succession and fertility. Second, the various ways that human activities can impact soils. Third, the range of management strategies that are available for both commercial and subsistence farming systems. That's it for topic 5.3, soil degradation and conservation. Until next time, happy learning.